Hello, Petals. How you doing? How's it going? So this one is a live recording, along with being a recording of a usual chapter. So you get the extra little behind the scenes bit in the live part, but you get the nicely produced bit in the normal playlist. So depends what you fancy. A little of each goes a long way, as they always say. Well, I don't know if they always say it or not, but you know, in these days and trying times, we've got to find comedy and humour where we can, haven't we? Yes, we do. Right, my lovely chickadees, my little petals, my absolute lovely beans, how you doing? How things going? I know I'm going to be checking in on you more regularly than usual because I've been flaky as out this year, and I do apologise for that. I can only apologise because it's just been a year that I will be glad to see your send off. In the next few years, probably give us a few more challenges, but we can do this. We will, yes, vinegar, and stuff. You know, some people say humbug, but I'm going to keep saying spitting vinegar. Please excuse me. I've had a long day. So, my lovely beans, if you can hit that notifications bell, like the chapter if you enjoy it, share and subscribe even if you want to, but you don't have to. But, you know, if you do, it goes a long way to paying the hamsters, keep them happy, to keep the wheels turning, the lights on. That'd be great. But most of all, please let me know how you're doing, how things are going, and how you're getting on in this festive season. We're supposed to have a polar Arctic blast. Yeah, they've been saying that for frickin' weeks. I've been waiting for a polar Arctic blast since October, but I've only seen a little smattering so far. Much disappoint. I'll let you know that for nothing. So, my lovely beans, I'm going to do chapter 11 of Here Comes the Sun by our beloved Mr. Thomas of Holt, as you know, and let's get cracking. The village cockerel woke up, glanced instinctively at the sky and did a double take. Funny, said its genetic memory to its motor centres. Little Helga, who was rapidly becoming Big Helga, but the inhabitants of the village affected not to notice, yawned. She rubbed her eyes and set off to the dairy to do the early milking. She was just crossing the yard, pail on arm, when she stopped, and she stared. Then she dropped the pail and ran back to the house. "Listen, everyone," she called. "Neighbour Bjorn is leaving the village." There was, for the first time in the history of the family, complete silence in the kitchen. Well, not complete silence. Minushka stepped back on the cat's tail with highly vocal consequences, and there was a noisy clatter when Grandmama dropped the porridge spoon, but at least nobody spoke. Little Helga, being young, misinterpreted the reaction as signifying disbelief. "Honest," she said, "I saw him going up the path to the top of the hill, and he had his axe over his shoulder with a big red spotted handkerchief tied to the handle, and he was carrying a huge sack over the other shoulder, and he was wearing his Hell's Angels vest, which he only wears when he goes down to the town to buy intoxicating liquor. And the little brown dog was trying to follow him, but he kept stopping and throwing apples at it." More silence. Then great-grandfather shook his head. "It's impossible," he said. "Nobody ever leaves the village. People come here from the outside, yes, but they never leave." "Because of it being idyllic here," great-grandmother explained, with a microscopic quantity of residual wistfulness in her voice. She had fallen in love with the village the moment she set eyes on it 62 years ago. But before that she had lived in Chicago, and she couldn't help remembering sometimes that in Chicago they were admittedly short on ideals, but hot on mustard, or hot as mustard on sanitation and running water. "The whole point of idyllic is you stay." "Oh dear," said grandmother. "If he's leaving, it can only mean he's been unhappy here. Oh, the poor man." "We must counsel him," said grandfather firmly, rising from the table and removing his bib. "We would never forgive ourselves if he left and we didn't try to stop him." "We would have failed him," grandmother added, in his hour of need. It would mean we are bad neighbours. Helga lowered her head and peered out of the window. It wasn't easy to see through because the unutterably picturesque leaded panes were so distorted with genuine age that light only squeezed through them after a severe struggle. "Do hurry," she said anxiously. "He stopped to try and find more apples to throw at the little brown dog. If you hurry, you might just catch him." So, grandmother and grandfather and great-grandmother and Minushka and little Helga and lazy Olaf and little Torsten dashed out of the house and up the hill to where Bjorn was taking careful aim with a suitably aerodynamic Granny Smith.
"Surely,"
panted grandfather, catching his breath,
"surely, neighbour Bjorn, you don't propose to leave us without even saying goodbye."
"Goodbye?"
Bjorn replied.
"Satisfied?"
He let fly, and the little brown dog finally took the hint and retired, hobbling to the woodshed. Narrator's note: poor little dog. Don't throw apples at little dogs, that's just not nice. Bjorn picked up his luggage. "But why?" little Torsten demanded. "Have you not been happy here, Dene Bjorn?"
"No."
"Where will you go?" wailed grandmother. "What will you do?" Bjorn considered for a while.
"First," he said, "I'm going to find the nearest town that's got a halfway decent bar and a cinema that shows films. And I'm going to—"
"Why does he want to see films, Grandmama?"
"Hush, Torsten."
"Yes, but Grandmama, if the films got mucky, doesn't that mean the pictures will come out all blurry and—"
"Hush! And after that," Bjorn went on, "I'm going to find out what's happened to the sun. All right?"
The villagers stared at him as if he was mad.
"What do you mean, neighbour Bjorn?"
asked lazy Olaf slowly.
"It's the sun, that's all. There's nothing wrong with it. Look."
He turned and pointed at the sky. The sun, as it happened, was obscured by a blanket of cloud.
"See,"
Bjorn said.
"It's what we call a cover-up where I come from. Somebody's made one hell of a cock-up, and they're keeping it under wraps." "Maybe," replied the grandfather. "Or maybe it just means it's going to rain soon. Rain is good, neighbour Bjorn. It makes the crops grow and nourishes the little seedlings and—" Yes, I know," Bjorn interrupted impatiently. "I used to make the stuff, okay? And I could tell you things about how we used to do it that'd make your hair stand on end," he added. "Look, just take it from me, all right? That is not the real sun. Something has happened to the real sun, and whatever it is they've got up there is a substitute, okay? Okay?" He turned definitively and started to walk away. Little Torsten wiped away a tear. "Don't go," he whimpered. Bjorn hesitated slightly and then quickened his stride. Little Torsten started to cry. "Please don't go," he wailed through his tears. "Even though you're grumpy and bad-tempered sometimes, and you never have a kind word for anyone, and never help anyone out, and never say thank you when Aunt Gretchen gives you noodle cakes, and you get drunk on Wednesday nights and go round picking people's hanging baskets, and you're cruel to animals, and you tread on the flowers around the village pub, and you never go to church, and you haven't paid your contribution to the poor relief fund for 3 years, and you put your cock in Uncle Gustav's parking space, and you still there for relief help for poor blind boy, and you cheat at Domino's, and you cut down Grandma's cherry tree for no reason, and she complained you call her a roof. Why did you leave empty crisp packets all over everyone's front gardens, and you trod on my toy horse once, and when I cried, you laughed at me. And Hilda says you got the malice of a war dog and the weeds from your garden blow out all over Uncle Cal's potato patch, and you put vodka in Big Peter's orange juice at his wedding, and his Uncle Christian's West Blind you moved your back fence 3 feet into his garden, and you drove the stars on the picture of the Blessed Virgin in the little white chapel. We still love you." There was a thoughtful silence. "Do we though?" said a voice at the back. "And he took my bicycle once without asking."
said Grandmamma, and when I found it again, the forks were all bent.
And there's my lawnmower,
added lazy Olaf.
When am I going to get that back, I ask myself.
He still hasn't paid for that broken window.
Loud music all hours of the day and night.
Revving up his chainsaw when people are trying to sleep. Grandfather stooped to pick up an apple lying on the ground in front of him.
Go on, he shouted. Get on out of it. We can do without your sort round here.
He threw the apple. And if he comes back again, said Grandmamma savagely, we'll set the dogs on him. The little brown dog, which had come bounding out with his tail wagging, bared his teeth and snarled. Narrator's note, karma. I digress. Halfway up the hill, Bjorn broke into a run.
She's keen, certainly, said the director. I have high hopes, you know. We need that sort of dedication and commitment in this department.
The director's secretary sniffed. Look, she said, someone's left the lights on all weekend.
Oh dear,
the director replied, fumbling in his pocket for the key.
Wait a moment, though. It's not locked. What on earth?
He pushed open the door carefully and walked into the main office. Good morning, Jane called out from behind the console. I worked over the weekend. I hope you don't mind. You're right. It's easy once you get the hang of it. Of course, the computer helps marvellously. It's just like the one we used to have where I worked before, except that the memory's bigger, of course. Do you like it? The director was staring at the screen. From time to time, he made teeny-tiny little joking noises. The screen was different. Instead of the intricate cobwebs of inextricably tangled patterns, it looked like nothing so much as a very finely woven net.
Oh, what have you done?
The director croaked. I've sorted it, Jane replied cheerfully. Looks so much better like that, don't you think? Everybody living happily ever after, you see, yes?
But
the director struggled for words.
But, you stupid girl, they're meant to be star-crossed lovers.
So, Jane replied, I uncrossed them. Simple as that, she added, and put the cover back over the console. It'll make life so much easier in the long run if people aren't having to cope with shattering emotional crises all over the place. Do you realise how many working days were lost in the Soviet Union last year because of emotional trauma? I looked it up. 4 million. And as for Scandinavia... The director collapsed against the filing cabinet, breathing heavily.
You uncross them, he gasped. My life's work, and you...
He made a noise like a horse whinnying and grabbed at the side of the cabinet for support. His secretary moved across to the desk and sharpened some pencils. And, Jane went on, I've programmed the computer to make sure they stay like that. It's much easier that way, you know, and ever so much more efficient. In fact, all it'll take from now on is one full-time member of staff to make sure it's running smoothly and a couple of part-timers to do the filing. I'm sure, she went on relentlessly, they'll be ever so pleased to just hear that in the Treasurer's office. On the screen behind her, a galaxy of perfectly regulated blue and pink dots flashed in harmonious concord. All over the world, boy was meeting girl and falling in love, and they were immediately going out and choosing bathroom curtains together. The director's secretary shrugged. Well, she observed, I'll say this much. It's a darn sight tidier than it used to be. I never could be doing with all those messy loops and squiggles. The director propped himself up against the filing cabinet and took off his spectacles.
Miss Frobisher,
he roared in a voice like thunder.
Be so kind as to get me the chief of staff on the telephone immediately.
But Miss Frobisher wasn't listening. She was gazing, with an expression on her face like stout Cortez finding a parking space in Piccadilly, at the electrician who had come in to replace a light bulb in the washroom, and he was gazing back. Bingo, Jane commanded. You see what I mean about efficient? With a cry of enraged anguish, the director dragged himself to his feet, shook a fist in Jane's direction, and staggered out of the door in the direction of the main office. For the record, he got no further than accounts, where he happened to share a lift with a rather nice motherly lady from pensions. When, 3 months later, they got back from their honeymoon, he resigned from his old job and applied for the assistant librarianship in the reference section.
"This protege of yours," Ganga said, "I'm beginning to get bad feelings about the whole idea."
Staff checked himself between the second and third syllables of "my protege" and considered. He had, after all, been in the service for a very long time now, and one learned to expect this sort of thing. As the old Catalan proverb says, he who chooses to live among rats should not get aerated at the sight of paw marks in the butter.
"Why?"
he said.
"Well,"
Ganga took up his usual position on the edge of the desk. Obviously, chairs were completely passé where he came from.
admittedly, she's got talent. Talent, yes, also initiative, drive, authority, intelligence, all that stuff. But, I can't help thinking she's getting above herself. I mean, first that thing with the sun, now all this stuff with star-crossed lovers. Like, wiping out a whole department overnight. You've got to draw the line somewhere, haven't you? She's making too many enemies too soon.
Staff stroked his chin with the rubber on the end of his propelling pencil. Narrators not remember what I said about propelling pencils.
And that means she's making enemies for us, you mean? Naturally.
Ganga picked up a handful of paper clips and started to weave them into a chain.
Major aggravation at this rate. You don't need me to tell you that.
They considered the matter in silence for a while.
Finance and general purposes smiled at me in the corridor the day before yesterday,
Staff said at last.
I spent the rest of the morning searching this office for hidden microphones. Find any? No,
Staff replied. Then he put his finger to his lips, picked up his empty coffee cup, inverted it, and put it over the buzzer on the edge of the desk.
Yes,
he went on.
6. I left that one where it was to make them think they'd won. Oh, I wouldn't worry about it,
Ganga said, smiling.
Sure, they've got every office in the building bugged. Oh, and by the way, if you only found 6, there's 3 more about here somewhere. I was talking with that kid Vince from supplies, but it's nothing to worry about. Nothing to...
Staff lowered his voice to a whisper.
Nothing to worry about,
he hissed.
Have you the faintest idea?
Ganga shrugged.
It all comes back to staffing levels, he said. Think about it. So they've got the room bugged. In order for that to mean anything, think of all the backup you'd need. You'd have to have a guy listening in on each office, and another 2 guys to transcribe it all, and another guy to sort through the transcripts and put yellow highlighter on all the treasonable bits. With an organisation this size, you're talking maybe a staff of 20,000 people. You know how many people work in internal security? 4. One of them's a trainee. All they do is go around putting the bugs in, maybe fixing them when they go wrong, putting in new ones when they get found. And even doing that, there's a waiting list of maybe 6 years. Nobody actually listens.
Staff thought for a moment, then rather shamefacedly removed his coffee cup.
Even so,
he said.
Exactly,
Ganga replied, leaning forward.
Even so, we just can't afford to give those guys any more ammunition than we can help. And this crazy young kid of not mine,
Staff couldn't help saying.
You found her, remember? Maybe yes, but... And you nagged her into joining. Okay, yes, we're talking details here. It was your idea too. You didn't stop me.
There was a frown on Ganga's face, a very incongruous sight, like Genghis Khan in a dinner jacket.
That doesn't alter the fact that we've got to be careful, both of us. It's a good idea. Don't let's screw it up.
It was my idea to put her in records, Staff pointed out, and it was you who made sure she was on hand when the son got stolen. In fact, I'm not so sure.
He stopped abruptly, aware that he had been thinking aloud.
Sure, Ganga replied. I put those kids up to it. We needed a new son. The old one was a goddamn liability.
He leaned closer forward still.
Now, you see what you're implicated in, huh?
Staff half rose. Then he sat down again.
You lunatic, he said. What did you want to go and do something like that for?
Never you mind, Ganga answered infuriatingly. My department has a cross-departmental brief. I have to keep several things going at the same time.
Is that an explanation?
Yeah, trust me.
Oh.
Staff bit the rubber on the end of his pencil in half and spat out the result. He was nervous when people from that particular department said, "Trust me." He couldn't help but visualize the scene, many years ago now, when one of them had said, "Go on, eat the bloody apple. Trust me." Of course, that sort of thing couldn't happen now, not with the new covenant and mortals being so depressingly litigious, but old habits die hard.
I think,
he said decisively,
we ought to call the whole thing off. You're right,
he added quickly.
You've convinced me.
Ganga was taken beautifully by surprise.
Hold on now,
he said.
I didn't say we should call it off. All I said was...
Staff smeared a bewildered look on his face.
You said she was becoming a liability, he replied. I agree with you. By the way, what on earth possessed you to agree to all those demands of hers, pay and so forth? You realise she's only down on the books as a trainee.
Wait a minute now.
Ganga was distinctly flustered, and his smile was melting and dripping down the side of his mouth like jam on the run from a doughnut.
I couldn't help it, he said. That kid's got personality, I guess. She just sort of came at me.
Right,
Staff replied, nodding.
And now I think it's about time she came at somebody else around here.
Another silence. In the corner of the room, unnoticed by anybody at all, one of the hidden microphones went wrong and began broadcasting the BBC World Service to its receiving station.
Like who?
Ganga said cautiously.
I think you are up to something.
Me?
Staff did a very creditable impression of startled innocence.
I've never been up to anything in my entire life. I was just thinking that if she's been attracting hostile criticism from certain quarters, then it's about time we turned her loose on her critics. What do you reckon?
I don't know.
Ganga stood up and walked across the window, inadvertently treading on another hidden microphone and squashing it flat. The device in question had been installed by the trainee, and nobody had told him about putting them where they wouldn't get trodden on.
That could make things worse, you know. The last thing we want to do is precipitate a confrontation.
Don't we?
Well, not that sort of confrontation.
Ganga was starting to exhibit signs of great tension. That is to say, he appeared perfectly normal, but his shoelaces were untying themselves and then weaving themselves back into fantastically intricate knots.
What did you have in mind, exactly?
Staff smiled. Well, at least he drew his lips across his face like the curtain of an old-fashioned proscenium arch theatre.
Nothing too dramatic, he replied. I just think the girl's proved herself perfectly capable in the field, so why not try her out in administration? After all, he added carelessly, she can't get up to much mischief sat behind a desk all day, can she?
I don't know,
Ganga replied, and his face was a blank.
Can she?
Staff leaned back in his chair and put the tips of his fingers together. He was enjoying himself.
Let's find out. Oh, and by the way,
When one has worked in an office where mind reading is the norm rather than the exception, one can't help noticing nuances of expression. Just as a telephone can't get away from the fact that there are always people wanting to talk through it, regardless of whether it's in the mood. Ganga's face remained blank, but one of his shoelaces broke spontaneously.
Yes,
he said.
While we're on the subject of bugging, I saw a psychiatrist yesterday,
Staff said. He waited for some pleasantry or other from his interlocutor. And then went on.
I told him, quite untruthfully as it happens, that for the last few weeks I've had this extraordinary idea that somebody's been listening to my thoughts inside my head, I told him. I didn't expect him to take me seriously, of course, but he did.
So I should think,
Ganga muttered.
Well, he wasn't your run-of-the-mill shrink,
Staff admitted.
In fact, he's the head departmental analyst, so he's used to that sort of thing. I should imagine so, anyway. And do you know what he suggested I should do?
Ganga beamed.
Go on, he said. You tell me.
He said,
Staff went on,
that it's not a particularly uncommon condition in our line of work. He said, and this is just what he told me, mind, that the only odd thing about it was that I'd noticed. Funny he should say that, since I was making the whole thing up, wouldn't you say?
Hilarious.
Anyway, Staff went on, the point he was making was that apparently one of our own departments, or at least a department of what you might call an associated agency, has perfected a technique of mental bugging, just so they can keep tabs on what the rest of us are thinking. A bit spooky, that, if it's true.
You've got my hair standing on end,
Ganga said.
Do go on, please.
Oh, there's nothing to worry about,
Staff said reassuringly.
Apparently, there's a very simple solution to the problem. The boys in the research lab tumbled to it almost immediately. All you've got to do is this, and I say, are you all right?
Ganga, who was sitting bolt upright with his face as white as a proverbial sheet, nodded his head stiffly. His hair really was standing on end. Staff noticed.
I'm sorry,
he said.
I didn't catch what you said.
His eyes were bloodshot, and he was starting to vibrate.
Would you kindly stop doing that now? According to my friend the shrink,
Staff continued, looking away and affecting not to notice anything unusual,
it's just a question of earthing the interloper into one's brainwaves. It's easy once you've got the knack, he says, though how you'd ever know you were doing it right beats me. Still, he says there's enough electricity inside the average person's head to fry an intruder like a sausage. I'm sure he's exaggerating. What do you think? Anyway,
Staff said, making a very slight movement, after which Ganga stopped, looking like a cross between a straight-back chair and a pneumatic drill, and slumped onto the floor in a heap.
It's just as well nobody's been trying to monkey about with the inside of my head, because he'd know he'd be in a fight if he did. My dear chap, what are you doing on the floor?
Resting,
Ganga croaked.
I've had, sort of a hard day.
He reached out a trembling hand and picked up the lenses of his glasses, which were all that was left, apart from a few droplets of melted plastic in the worn pile of the carpet.
I think I'll get back to my office and do something.
Capital idea,
Staff replied.
Mind how you go.
I will.
Ganga lifted himself onto his knees with an effort and crawled to the side of the desk.
Want to borrow a comb?
Thanks,
Ganga mumbled.
Don't think I'll have the strength to lift one right now. But maybe I'll take you up on it later.
Please yourself,
Staff said, picking up a file and opening it.
You know what? The one thing that really cheers me up about this whole business is knowing that, come what may, you and I are on the same side. You know, implicit mutual trust, that sort of thing. It's a great comfort to me, it really is. Cheerio, then. Ciao.
Profiteroles,
said the Lord High Cardinal.
I should live so long.
The Count of the Stables winked at him. Go on, he said. Be a devil. He checked himself. Go on, he said. Tomorrow you can have a salad. The Lord High Cardinal shrugged.
You've convinced me,
he said.
Oh, there's the super inglese.
Nah, that's for thin people. Come on, go for it.
Okay.
Right, said the Count of the Stables. That's 6 profiteroles. Hey, Rosa, 6 profiteroles over here. I got it, replied the Emperor's sister. Just give me a moment, will you? We've got no help again today. The County Palatine clicked his teeth.
You want to get shot of that kid, he said. She's no good to you.
Rosa gave him a withering look, the sort of look that scours roses of greenfly and lifts impacted grease off the inside of neglected ovens. You know how hard it is to get help, even crummy help this time of year. You don't. You let me run my business, okay? She scuttled off under a ziggurat of dirty plates. The electors sighed.
She works too hard,
opined the Lord Treasurer. It's a shame, agreed the Count of the Stables. We should find her a reliable waitress. The Count of the Saxon Shore grunted.
Anything that'd improve the service round here would be fine by me. You can get peptic ulcers waiting too long between courses.
A match flared at the end of an 8-inch cigar.
You got to look after your health in this life,
commented the Lord High Cardinal.
Because if you don't, nobody else will.
He burped smoke like a dragon with a carburetor trouble, while the other electors exchanged surreptitious glances. They had an uneasy feeling that the Lord High Cardinal had just made a pronouncement ex cathedra, in which case somebody really ought to write it down.
Anyway,
he continued briskly,
to business.
The electors stifled a selection of sighs and yawns. A working lunch, in their view, was a truly wonderful idea, but not nearly as truly wonderful as a plain ordinary lunch hold the work. Still, they had a duty. Well, said the Lord Treasurer, I did the books last night, and they're looking pretty healthy. He reached in his coat pocket for his spectacles and yesterday night's wine list. We got income 17.4464 million kreuzers, expenditure 17.44639 million kreuzers, capital reserves nil, income transferred to capital account nil, fixed assets nil, short-term liabilities nil, written down balance 50 kreuzers, transferred to cash account 50 kreuzers. Okay. The County Palatine frowned. What does that mean, Tony? He asked. It means, replied the Treasurer with a grin, today we can afford to leave a tip. The electors nodded their approval, and the Lord High Cardinal cleared his throat.
Policy review time next, folks, he said. Anybody got anything to say about our policy?
I think our policy is just great, Rocky. What do you say, Tony?
Yeah, it's a great policy, Rocky. What's the damn broad with the goddamn sweet? Where is she?
Okay.
The Lord High Cardinal penciled a little tick on the back of the menu.
Now then, what's next? Oh, nuts, I forgot the minutes of the last meeting. Anybody take any minutes? Last meeting.
Narrator's not frickin' hate minutes. I don't see the point. I don't understand it. Well, the thing is, right, you can do bullet points and you can record it. Simple. You know, it's like if you take too many minutes or you don't take enough minutes, but there's never anything in between. You just want the general gist of what's been agreed. So do bullet points, do the outcome, that's it. Especially when you got to type the flipping things up. Which I did once or twice for the old place I used to work for, which was just the worst place in the world. But anyway, I digress. Let's go on with our story. Yes, shall we? Yes, shall we? Okay.
Anybody take any minutes last meeting?
Nah.
Okay then, approved as drawn.
The Lord High Cardinal raised his eyebrows and scratched them with the end of his pencil.
That just leaves any other business, guys,
he said.
Hold on, though,
he added, as Rosa approached with a tray.
Here it comes now.
When they had finished any other business, and the Count of the Saxon Shore had had extra any other business with a side order of whipped cream, they sat for a while thinking and breathing heavily until the arrival of the coffee recalled them to the next item on the agenda.
Date of the next meeting,
said the Lord High Cardinal.
Thursday all right with you guys?
The electors nodded.
Okay. Thursday at 12:15. Meeting closed. Hey, Rosa, where are the toothpicks? I've got a big fat lump of veal gristle lodged behind my bridge work. You want me to choke to death, yeah?
Now, coffee was traditionally taken in silence, or at least without articulate speech, to give the electors an opportunity to ruminate on the decisions they had just taken, and if necessary, review them or supplement them with a brandy or a small shot of grappa. It was, above all, a moment of tranquillity, essential in the headlong life of a monumentally important officer of state. Sometimes, however, something happened to spoil it. For example, the proprietor's sister tripping over her feet and depositing a plateful of tagliatelle verdi on the lap of the Count of the Saxon Shore.
Yay!
howled the Count.
You damn crazy bitch, that's hot!
I'm sorry, said Rosa perfunctorily. She leant over and scooped the tagliatelle back out of the Count's lap onto the plate with a fork. You should count yourself lucky it was only a melted butter and cheese sauce. Bechamel sauce on a nice light suit like that, you'd be in real trouble. The Lord High Cardinal raised a caterpillar-like eyebrow.
That's not like you, Rosa,
he said.
You've got something worrying you.
Rosa sighed. That waitress, she said. That so-called waitress, she only calls and says she's handing in her notice on account of she's getting married and moving to Seattle. Some people just don't care. She bustled away to get a hot cloth. The electors looked at each other.
I move, said the County Palatine. We find Rosa, a new waitress. Seconded?
Seconded,
replied the Count of the Saxon Shore grimly. As soon as possible. Wearing food isn't me, you know.
Right. The County Palatine frowned. Anybody know of anybody? He inquired.
Gotta be somebody good, mind. You know, reliable, honest, intelligent, hard-working, efficient, sure-footed, he added. Good sense of balance, all that sort of thing.
There was silence, during which the sun broke through the thick mantle of cloud that had masked it for a week or so now, flashed momentarily and then ducked away out of sight once more. A brief flare of dazzle on the outside of the window seemed to inspire the Lord High Cardinal, for he suddenly clapped his hands together and rubbed them warmly.
Boys, he said, I know just the person.
George sat down at the controls, fastened the safety harness, and switched on the intercom. There was the usual crackle.
Alias 1 to control centre. Come in, please. Over,
he said, but without conviction. Old Dog screamed every fibre of his being, new tricks. Control centre to Alias 1, you are cleared, repeat, cleared for commencement of preliminary takeoff procedure in 15 minutes. Over. George growled. Didn't like talking to a computer. Made you feel odd. It was like talking to yourself. Makes you go blind, talking to yourself, so his mother had told him. He blinked a bit. Not, he had to admit, that a lot of it was not an improvement. It worked, for a start. When he wanted to turn left, you just wiggled the stick. You didn't have to lean over and lean your back against the side of the cockpit. In fact, you didn't even have to wiggle the stick. Something called autopilot would do it for you.
I wonder, George muttered resentfully to himself, how much he's getting a week. Probably non-union too. Alias 1 to Control Centre, he intoned. Comments and pre-takeoff. Check this program over.
He said it with roughly the same degree of expression and involvement as a forcibly converted Aztec saying the Mass in Latin. And without very much more idea what it was supposed to mean, it was all very well, sure, instead of having some brainless irk of a trainee standing out on the tarmac, hauling on the propeller to get the thing fired up. All you needed to do was press a button, provided, of course, you could remember which button. There were rather a lot of them, and they were all exactly the same shade of red. Well, if things got tricky, you could always ask the autopilot. Now it is not airplane, autopilot, one of the best scenes in film history. I digress. Instinctively, he felt behind his seat for his thermos, and then remembered that in the shiny new design there was no convenient little ledges and nooks for secreting personal belongings in. Instead, there was a beverage control monitoring system, which unerringly threw a cup of warm brown water all over him as he was coming into the bumpy stretch above 10:45 a.m.
Time I retired, he said to himself. If only they'd let me, he added. Control Centre to Helios 1, scheduled takeoff time -14, 4 minutes, over.
If only, George continued to muse, the boy hadn't gone off like that. He had talent for this job, the boy had. Wonder where he was now. There had been a rumour going about the social club that he'd packed in the service altogether and got off doing some job or other, doing and round and among the mortals. Still, they tended to say that about anybody who went missing for more than a week these days. Perhaps the boy was going to be seconded back now that they've gone and bought this new model. In natural, that lad. Fly anything, given time and provided nobody minded that what he collided with while he was practising. As takeoff approached, what was wrong with calling it Dawn, by the way? Dawn had class, but you'd feel a bit of a Charlie talking about a rosy-fingered takeoff or the takeoff coming up like thunder. Something small but hard, like the ball in a pinball machine, started to roll about inside George's head, and maybe it was the faint jolt as the giant machine lifted smoothly into the air that finally gave it the impetus to roll into place. Anyway, roll it did. Clunk. There was something very wrong with this machine, and nobody had realised. What the hell was it? George flipped the intercom back to transmit.
Alias 1 to Control Centre. I'm cruising at 500,000 metres and climbing. All systems functional. Over.
He replaced the microphone thing, looked around to make sure nobody could see him, and switched off the autopilot.
No hard feelings, chum, he explained. You're doing a lovely job, but you know, it always was a rotten passenger, me.
He took hold of the stick and instinctively moved it to the right position. At once, he became aware of a minute difference in the feel of the thing. The pinball rolled around in its hole and settled again, and in the back of George's mind some coloured lights lit up and shouted, "Replay." Slower. Ever since he'd switched it onto manual, it had slowed down. George glanced out the side of the cockpit at the ground. Centuries of practice flying the old Sun on manual had enabled him to gauge the airspeed simply by watching the ground, while his brain made a series of subconscious lightning-quick calculations. He knew he was flying at the right speed, just by the way the shadows of the trees below him shortened and lengthened again as he passed over, and yet just now it slowed down. It's impossible to confuse deceleration with any other experience in the world, like mashed swede. Narrators note mashed swede and mashed carrots mixed in together with black pepper. Oh, heavenly. There's absolutely nothing you can mistake it for, which meant,
"Bugger me,"
George said, and in spite of himself he chuckled. It only went to show you do no good by fiddling with things just for the sake of it. It explained everything. The wilting crops, the freakish behaviour of the tides, the fact that the pole star was halfway up the back of Cassiopeia's chair, the friction burns down the left-hand side of the Kalahari Desert, the way his wife always seemed surprised when he got in from work these days. The daft sods have made the damn thing go too fast. So, it would appear that George has worked it out. They've replaced the sun with one that's a little bit faster than the old one was. So, here we go. This is how it's going to go down for Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. So Christmas Eve, we might be on about 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock at night, maybe. And then we're just going to roll with it throughout Christmas Day. So it's going to be here and there, this and that, bits and bobs, back, front and sideways. But before me cat starts shouting at me to give him some extra bickies, because it's about that time of night, I'm going to have to crack on. So if you're cold, yourself up warm. If you're too hot, get some hydration in you. But most importantly, stay safe. Take it easy.